Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to DevMarCon, the first developer marketing summit from the PMA. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you enjoy the sessions that we have lined up for you. With expert presentations, specialist fireside chats, and deep dive panel discussions on the agenda, suffice to say, you're in for a treat. Just before we jump in, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's played a part in making this event possible. Our sponsors, partners, speakers, and of course you, the Product Marketing Alliance community. You can engage with all our speakers and their sessions today by posting your questions in the comments section of the broadcast, or you can reach out to them in the Developer Marketing channel in our Slack community. Remember, you can also catch up with all the day's content on demand, plus a whole host of other amazing benefits by becoming a PMA member. But for now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next session.
Hey, welcome everyone to this fireside chat on dev relations and dev marketing. Today, we're going to discuss how these two critical functions differ but also complement each other with Mickey Tang, who heads product marketing at Magic. I'm your host, Bertrand Hazard, and without any further ado, Mickey, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and a little bit about Magic to kick things off. My background spans multiple different disciplines within marketing, and eventually, like so many of us in the PMA community, I fell in love with product marketing. And so really got to dive in a little bit more on developer side at Envision and Magic, where I'm currently at. I lead product marketing and growth, and Magic is a startup that's transforming the digital identity space. And we're focused on making it super simple for developers to add passwordless authentication into their apps. I'm excited to dive in more on this topic.
Awesome. Well, Mickey, let's dive into it. So what I think would be great for our audience is if you could speak first to the differences, but also similarities between the developer relations and dev marketing functions.
Yes, it's a great question. So to kick off, let me show you a quick visual to bring this to life. So first, what is DevRel? I like to think of it as developer relations as representing the voice of the developer community. And so at its core, developer relations is about building positive relationships, built into the name, and helping communities of developers become successful. And so I'll emphasize the word relationship because of how important trust and empathy come into play when engaging with these technical communities. And so one way to think about it is really DevRel focuses on having a pulse on the community. And then on the other side, you have developer marketing. Dev marketing is representing the voice of the brand and or product to best support the community. And so if you take a step back in the developer market, you actually have to have a great product. That's P1. But then how do you get the developer community to understand it's a great product? How do you get them to actually try it? How do you get them to actually think about it in the right way? And I see that as the summary of developer marketing. So in practice, I have here in the visual kind of some of the activities that both functions distinctly cover. But when it comes down to each company, it can look very different from company to company, especially the day-to-day. So depending on the needs and goals of the company, it can really vary. But at the end of it, the day, community is really at the center of both functions. So in this visual, you see developer relations and developer marketing really complement each other. And so the closer collaboration is between the two, the more in turn you're supporting the developer community, which is the ultimate goal.
I actually love that visual. I actually think that's something I might even copy. But anyway, I think it's great, and I think you hit the nail when you talk about like really like the community of developers are at the center, right? Now, here is an interesting challenge: is obviously you've got two functions who are basically supporting or trying to target like a similar audience. So how do they divide responsibilities between the two functions, and where is the overlap? Because there needs to be some overlaps probably somewhere.
Yeah, 100%. So in my experience, the overlap is around the community. So in that visual, there was actually two areas that were repeated in both of the functions, and that's developer experience. So both DevRel and Dev Marketing empathize with developers' pain points, firstly. They translate that empathy and then actually become helpful, right? So whether that's proposing a solution via content, creating a guide, documentation. They have to show the concrete steps for how to build something. Utility is at the heart of all of that. And then ultimately, it's that shared objective of driving growth for the company. And so there's this quote I love from Stephen O'Grady's book, The New Kingmakers. I don't know if you've read it, I highly recommend. There's just this innate challenge with developer marketing where developers are essentially have built up an immunity to traditional marketing. And so that's the rub. We have to make sure that messaging doesn't sound quite like marketing, and otherwise you'll turn off developers. But which is why developer relations and developer marketing need to tightly collaborate, right, to help de-risk this challenge. And in my mind, it's a really symbiotic relationship where each function complements each other, and there's unique value in each function, but together that's where the impact comes to the broader organization.
That's awesome. And so let me ask you one more question. I've also come across a lot the terms of developer advocacy. In your opinion, do you see developer advocacy as the same as developer relations? Do you see it part of dev relations or even part of dev marketing? I think we have a tendency of using lots of different words, and I just want to make sure that we're crystal clear of where we think that developer advocacy, for instance, fits in this visual that you've been sharing with us.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. The terms are always somewhat interchangeable in the industry, and so based on my experience at Envision and Magic, developer relations is not just the same name for developer advocates. So developer relations, in my mind, is the umbrella term for the team whose primary responsibility is building a community, both online and offline. And that includes developer advocacy, plus sometimes developer experience, events, community management, content even. So it can go as far as those to include those kinds of roles. And at some bigger companies like Twilio, especially, it can be a really big umbrella term. But to zoom in a bit, a developer advocate is someone who likely has some sort of coding experience, whether it's an official comp sci degree, they might have been to coding school, or they've even been a full-time developer in the past life. In my day-to-day, I see they're often building sample apps, live coding, or even giving demos to developer community and engaging on that more technical level.
Yep.
And focusing on, working on closely with two awesome developer advocates at Magic on my team, and each of them has a passion for specific tech frameworks, and they're active on specific forums as well.
No, that's very cool. I think it makes total sense. And actually, it leads me to my next question, because I know that's one that I've seen on the PMA community, but a lot of questions always come to, okay, so I understand roughly about where are these two functions and how they differ, but where should they live? I think we have a tendency, in product marketing and product marketing to always worry about, where should they report? Should they be, under marketing? Should they be under product marketing? Should they be even in a different functions? I'll just give you an example. That's SonarSource, the company I work with. We have a developer advocate who actually works, in our engineering team. And I can see pros and cons about it. So anyway, I'm curious about your perspective and what you've encountered in your different experiences about where should the functions live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my experience is that there's no hard and fast rule for where they should live. It really tends to be fluid. I've seen it in cases where, similar to SonarSource, developer relations is really close to engineering. It depends on the company's priorities and the organic org structure.
Yep.
Specifically for DevRel, I will say that no matter where the team reports organizationally, it's important for developer relations to have a direct line to dev marketing, PMs, engineers. And so in the case of Magic, we are actually having developer relations within marketing. And so that's a natural fit for us because our biggest priority right now is growth. And so that's where developer relations reports to marketing. And no matter, again, just to echo, depending on where they report, the benefits of collaboration with developer marketing are the same. So I think it's really context specific, but highly focused on bringing that product feedback back to the cross-functional teams.
Yeah. Well, and I think you and I talked about it when we were kind of preparing for this chat, but it's a little bit when we get the typical questions, where is product marketing? Should it fit under marketing? Should it fit under product?
Exactly.
And my answer is always like, it should fit under the leader that actually understand the function, understand the strategic function of product marketing or dev marketing in the context of our conversation today. And
Mhm.
ultimately, it's making sure that wherever it fits, and wherever it lives, it matters more about, what ultimately, we deliver as an organization. So I think we agreed on this one. Another question that you and I were just having, and we were talking about, it's like, when is the right time to start, a dev relations or dev rel functions? And is it like before dev marketing, which in this case, we're kind of talking about product marketing.
Mhm.
When do you start? And I think I know the answer, but I still think it's a good one to ask.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. I think the short answer here is it depends. To
Yeah.
expand on that a bit, the right timing depends on a lot of different things, like the product and its maturity and the stage the company is in, and of course, how central the developer community is to the overall business and growth strategy. So, you know, if you feel like developer relations is an acute need that needs to be solved and best support the community, then yeah, that's the right signal to start to build it
Yep.
from the ground up. But of course, in developer marketing, because it can be so synonymous with product marketing, just geared towards developers, it can take shape in different ways. And I think it's up to the leader of that function to actually start to map the path for how it can
Yep.
align with the business strategy.
Makes total sense. Okay, so we've talked a little bit at the different responsibilities between dev relations and dev marketing. We've talked a little bit about, where maybe you should think about it when it comes to where it should sit. Let's talk about how now these two functions, can work collaboratively. Any insights? I think that's the core of what we discussed. It's like how can they work together, and what's the best practice for them to work together? Because I can also see where potentially there could be some conflicts. So I'm
Yep.
curious about your take on this one.
Yeah, I think for sure they can work together. I mean, it's absolutely both. It's not an either or, whether it's DevRel versus dev marketing. 100% believe that they should be working collaboratively, and it's a huge mistake if these teams are operating in silos. So when it comes to things like OKRs, I think the more you can share those OKRs around functions and ironing out kind of the brass tacks for how this comes to life, process-wise or ops-wise, we adapt a process called Shape Up, which is what Basecamp uses, and they're really quick fire cycles. It's 4 weeks on and 2 weeks of a cool down, which really helps us see the sprint as much shorter and quick turn, and we can experiment together and rapidly iterate around those wins that we see and share those learnings back to the company. So I think it's whatever works best for your specific company at the stage that you're at, but I think 100% want to echo that the departments should definitely be collaborating together.
But I think what you're saying also is that the best way to collaborate is have clarity around what should be the desired outcomes for each team.
Yes.
So everyone knows,
Yes.
what are the kind of expectations on the other team, and then they can kind of say, okay, here we have like some mutual, thing that we need to do, or we need to work together on this one to either help you support your objectives or your outcomes, and then in this case to help us support our outcomes. Yeah, that makes total sense. And another thing, I know we have a short time today, but people love to ask, about like, are there any tools or software that actually you would recommend that would help to scale, but maybe most importantly, measure the impact that both functions are having? I think it's one thing about making sure we can measure the impact and do it right, because at the end of it, especially I think in a dev world where, data is so important. I think it's something that we as product marketers, dev marketers, however we want to call ourselves, need to live by. So I'm just curious if any kind of like tools that you might have used before.
Yeah, so I think for the first thing that comes to mind is a tool called Orbit. So we use that at Magic. It's really helpful one-stop shop to see a holistic view of all the metrics that you'd look at for community building and growth. So on the quant side, you have tracking online engagement. So anything from a GitHub pull request to a Twitter comment, some on-site metrics too from conferences, for instance, that developer advocates are attending. You can see how many people raise their hand for a question and are familiar with their product already. And then on the qual side, it's a little bit trickier because community is so relationship oriented. So you have to see, the in-person connections. And these days it's all virtual connections. And how do you actually map those out? What are those anecdotes that you can bring back and those verbatim quotes that you can bring back to galvanize the company? But I think one metric that's really interesting is something called the warm handoffs, which are basically when developer advocates or developer relations brings back a connection and an intro to either marketing, for instance, a customer who they want to feature in a case study, or a community member who wants to actually hand raise and write a guest author blog post. Those are the really cool wins that only developer relations can bring back to the company. And so I love to see that impact kind of like map out and trend around quant metrics that some tools can help us with, but also the qualitative side where it's more about the storytelling and how we can actually drive awareness for our brand.
Yeah, I have to say, I think it's one thing that's interesting for me in my journey in the dev marketing world is that, it's I'd like to say it's a big world. There's millions of developers, right? And but it's actually a small world at the same time. There's a lot of people who are influencers in different communities. And it's always, an interesting when you start to engage and build a relationship, with specific influencers. And over time, you start to see them like, doing presentations, videos, and they incorporate your product, or they talk about your product as how they found a problem, right? And they explain the problem because that's what developers love to do. So anyway, I think you're hitting the nail. I mean, there are some more tangible and less intangible, metrics that people can use. So I guess at this point, I think to me, the next question for you is, what would be your advice for a product marketing team which is setting up a developer marketing or dev relations strategy for the first time? How do you get started? And I'd love to say, any pitfalls that you would like them to avoid, going through.
Peaks and
that
valleys,
you might have
right?
gone through. Yes.
Yeah, so my advice would be to start small. I think to your point earlier, like the world of developer marketing and developer relations is so vast. There's so much you could be doing at any given time. And so to reframe that a bit, it's really about honing in on those exact experiments you want to do, rapidly test, find the small wins, iterate, and then socialize. So there's the storytelling piece of it, like being able to advocate for your advocates, which basically means being really honest with where you're currently at, figuring out the multiple phases of a campaign and a strategy to get to that future state, to hit a certain goal, set some baselines based on real data, and most importantly, invite input from the dev relations team. So I think it's that collaboration again, setting a new motion in forward for the first time can be quite daunting, but again, starting small, building momentum over time, socializing the learnings along the way to get buy-in from stakeholders. And ultimately, community building takes time. So staying patient with it, important to level set expectations from everyone and get buy-in along the way.
Are you saying that we need to become more patient as we work with developers than maybe we've been in the past and working for, whether you are in the B2B traditional, technology space or some other spaces, even B2C, both, you and I both have a B2C background as well. So,
totally.
but yeah, I totally agree. And I think it was another question, but I think you kind of answered the question, which was like, okay, but how do you do even if you're a product team of one? And I know that, many of us, we've all been the first product marketer at some point in a company, and there is this high expectations, usually if you work for a smaller company, to be able to do everything. So any advice to the to all our friends and colleagues who are right now, by themselves and trying to build a function and save the world? How would you, any specific advice for them?
Yeah, I would say definitely echo that patience, making sure that you are transparent and open about things will change. Community building is dynamic, developers are dynamic, trends are happening all the time. Just being open and transparent about your multi-phased approach and that it's not a overnight success as much as we all want it to be. As much as we can be self-critical and kind of honest and transparent with the small wins that will add up over time, that's where the community can start to thrive. And that's where the real growth is unlocked.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. So I think we're coming up very close to our time allocated today, and I'm sure we'll take more questions later, but you're clearly passionate about this topic of dev relations, dev marketing. Again, you and I had the chance to talk a couple of times. I'd love to conclude. I'm a big believer in what is the one key takeaway, but I'm going to just ask you something slightly different is what is your one nugget of advice that you would like to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, so if I could sum it up in one thing that you remember from this talk, let it be this, embrace the community, right? It's a great metaphor for how dev relations and dev marketing complement each other naturally and to make the greater good for the community. So it's being that champion, helping the community be successful and knowing that, there are unique strengths that each function contributes to the broader picture, and then also building together, right? So modeling the behavior you want to see internally for the community externally.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing because I think it's struck me listening to you again today. But I think what really strikes me is like clarity and being very clear about, you know, how the both functions have are complementary, and you know, understanding what each one is working on, what they bring to the table, and ultimately, you know, when to sync, when to make sure that you're aligned. I think ultimately we'll get any organizations and teams will have a dev rail and a dev marketing function works even better. Mickey, that was awesome. I love, you know, how the conversation. I love, you know, what we've covered today. I love your visual. I think, you know, there's probably going to be some requests for your visual. And so I'm sure that we will make sure that, you know, your visual is available, as well as, you know, probably your contact information. And I'm sure we'll be able to take as well some additional questions that we have. But with that, what I want to do today is just for now, thank you very much for, you know, sharing with us all these great insights. And at this point, I think we should just try to answer any questions that the audience has.
Perfect. Thank you so much.